Civilization 7 has changed. Welcome to update 1.2. Let's jump in and take a look at the major changes, beginning with resources, where Firaxis have not only added 10 brand new types of resource, but also changed how a lot of the existing ones work. Let's start with the new. As you can see, llamas, the happy little things, provide +5 happiness and 1 production. I won't talk about all of the new resource effects, but you can see them on screen, like tin here, throughout the video. The list ranges from mangoes right the way through to wild game, with many of the resources stretching across the first 2 ages, though some of them will disappear as you move through into the modern age. More accurately, they may be replaced. Some other changes that happened more sort of under the hood: new narrative events for each of these new resources have been added. Resources should also be a little bit more randomized at the start of the game, and you'll probably see more changes as you move through the ages. Finally here, some resources will be tied to certain parts of the map, so you may need to trade or explore to find certain treasured resources. Speaking of the treasured variety, it is the technically treasure resources that receive the greatest buffs in probably this entire patch update. They now all have passive effects for your empire, providing you with a benefit all the time, and they look different. The T and the furs at the top of your screen have a little wind or wavy looking icon underneath them. Well, that means they're not only a treasure, but they're also a treasure resource in a distant land, the kind of ones you'll need to eventually connect should you want to meet that victory, that legacy condition. Back to the treasured resources though, you may have also noted by now, if you're a regular Civ 7 player, that the category has expanded to include new resources like rubies, as well as some recategorization of existing resources, think horses and furs. They should also be better divided across the land masses of the game, though that honestly is a little bit less important. Finally, because you've heard me say the word resource enough times in this video, some buffs and changes, nerfs indeed, were made. Fish are generally worse, while dyes are generally better. We've touched on a few other things here like UI, but I'd like to move us into the next big category. It's map generation. Map generation, one of the sticking points for Civilization 7, of course, and with this change, I don't know if I'm quite as convinced. Here you're looking at a GIF that they shared as part of today's sort of news update for the release of patch 1.2. The patch notes specifically say that coastal erosion has been improved on all of the map types to help break up coastlines more, especially in the polar regions at the top and bottom of the map. Now, looking through this rotation, looking at the maps that have been generated that they're showcasing, it's still very obvious to me that the generation is basically 2 rectangles with little bits cut out. Though, on some of these examples, the coastal erosion looks more significant than others. There is, indeed, it would seem, like here, a little bit more variation. Personally though, I'm not sold on this one. Quickly here, one thing that I am sold on, and is an easy, if not very late winner, the one more turn button has been added to the franchise, which really coined the term. All victories will be disabled when you move through into one more turn, and the age progress indicator will be stalled, showing an infinite symbol. However, you will still be able to complete steps towards victories, see their cinematics, experiment, play around a bit. You'll even be able to grab Legacy Path achievements in this mode. Now let's move through and talk about who you're playing against. Specifically changes to the AI, nerfs to diplomacy, and a tiny little bit of multiplayer news at the end of this section too. We begin with diplomacy, which generally speaking has been nerfed. As you can see, it's now much harder to carry out the more devious side of diplomacy. The upside to these changes is that counter-spying can now be used against any number of players. Makes a lot of sense. The penalty for carrying out some of those espionage actions, though, has greatly increased, from 50% penalty of the base cost to 100%, and the amount of time it takes to carry one of those out has also increased by 50%. Generally, you'll find it'll be more difficult to carry out espionage actions, and they'll be a little bit more costly, not just for producing them, but also for failing them. Moreover, and more specifically onto the AI side of things, changes here were relatively light, though the AI should now build larger navies when playing on the archipelago map. It will also make a few other adjustments to how it handles land attacks towards its naval units, and how it uses unique great people. Finally, a quick note on multiplayer before we talk about big changes to the economy and food. Teams mode is now in the game, where you can share relationships, war status, alliance status, and visibility. Of note, this time around, you will not share your civics or technology progress. Now let's move on. Welcome to Chapter 3 of the video. Here we're going to talk about the more generic gameplay changes, as well as changes that really focus on cities and economies. Firstly, though, a quick note for those of you afraid of natural disasters. The light setting will now make them 50% less frequent, even lighter than before. Moderate will also make them a little less common than it used to. Focusing in on the economy, let's begin with one of my favorite headline changes, and one that I stressed in my last video with a boring, vaguely inaccurate maths lesson. It's food and growth. The previous hard cap on population growth, when stockpiling food has been removed, the formula now scales quadratically instead of cubically. Long story short, the distance between each growth event, the amount of time and the amount of food actually, has decreased. You should find that foodie civs, particularly in the later game, are much better, and growth more generally, more broadly, is easier to achieve. The greater list of updates includes a lot of stuff. I'll of course have the full patch notes linked below. Mostly I'm focused on gameplay changes rather than bug fixes. There were so many of those. However, buried within those you can see that towns can now buy bridges. You can purchase bridges in towns. And they've done a lot of work on coastal connections. So towns with a water-based building are now considered coastal in of themselves, and they should connect your resource network, which has of course also seen a lot of other changes, much more easily and much more readily. We should find less difficulty around that. Moreover, on the general list of updates, again, huge list of things, alongside some of the UI changes that I'll cover off specifically in the next section of this video, was a focus on the technologies themselves. Now, when you look at a tech or civic tree, you'll be able to tell if a wonder within a technology has already been built or not, which should make it a bit easier to determine whether you want to reach for that tech or not. Stacking has also been added, queuing more appropriately. So if I want to build shipbuilding here, for example, I can just click it. The game will now automatically queue with some ugly UI to tell me the order within which it will research technologies to get me straight there. Unfortunately, you don't seem to be able to shift-click other things, so I can't just queue up, say, an entire age's worth of technologies. Maybe that's a good thing for me. I might need to be a little more adaptive, but it does seem like a little bit of a letdown on this front. This feature does not feel finished to me in the slightest. More changes did, however, come to the UI, like the Great Person user interface you can see here, as well as, of course, the treasure resource icons that we've already discussed. Great People will now highlight the tiles where they need to go to use their ability. Research queuing is in the game, and there's also a handy new repair all option, which is really needed when you have a whole load of things to repair in a town or city. For example, if a natural disaster is hit, or if, for whatever reason, the AI has decided to start pillaging. Next, we have some rather unexpected, although not all that meaningful changes to the military, specifically to cavalry units. First, I thought I'd just throw up these platform-specific changes in case any of you are playing on Mac OS or PlayStation, maybe. Some issues that you've been running into have been fixed. Back onto the topic at hand, and military. Cavalry units, generally, and their entire category, receive a little bit of a nerf here. The production cost and maintenance has been increased. Production cost by 10 production per age, and maintenance by 1 gold for all cavalry units in all ages. A couple of other noteworthy changes that weren't just bug fixes. Packed units can now be upgraded simultaneously. This is arguably a UI improvement. Nonetheless, it followed hot on the heels from the UI section. Give me a little break. And finally, maybe important to you, the initiative promotion now applies consistently on rivers and rough terrain and continues to function correctly after age transitions. Many more of the updates, like the aerodrome commander at the bottom there, were simply just bug fixes. If you'd like to see the full list of changes, you can do so down below, including pages like this, a whole load of fixes to narrative events, for example, that of course also received a little bit of a glow up in this update thanks to new resources being added and narrative events being tied to those. Thank you very much for joining me for this lightning fast. Look at that, just a little over 10-minute look at Civilization 7's perhaps most significant update. Certainly one of two major updates, major patch updates that have rolled out to the game. And a lot of the changes, like this UI here, by the way, are incredibly welcome. But still a few rough edges around some of them, like the technology stacking, for example. Overall, I think this is a great update to Civilization 7, though of course there's still more work to be done. For now, go out and enjoy that one more turn, and maybe a fresh playthrough with some foodie civs. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.